Shopping malls are temples of consumerism, vibrant places filled with people and lights during the day. But when the doors close and the escalators stop, the atmosphere changes completely. The long, dark hallways and faceless mannequins create an environment where the impossible seems to come to life. Many security guards and janitors have quit after witnessing things that logic cannot explain. Today, I present 3 terrifying stories that took place after the stores closed. Get ready, because after this, you will never look at a storefront the same way again. It was a Thursday night, one of those days when the mall slowly empties out after the shopping rush. I worked in a small clothing store where I usually stayed late to finish the inventory. When I finally locked the door with the sound of the bolt, I felt relieved but also somewhat uneasy. The atmosphere in the mall became heavy and silent, as if everything were holding its breath. With a sigh, I recorded the last bits of data on my tablet. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly, and the feeling of being alone in such a large place weighed on my chest. From where I stood, I could see the long, deserted corridors leading to other stores, empty, dark, and wrapped in a gloom of abandonment. The only thing breaking the silence was the constant hum of the lights, which seemed to intensify with every passing second. Suddenly, I heard a sound. It was a subtle echo, almost imperceptible, like the creak of the linoleum floor under a foot. I stopped dead in my tracks, wondering if my mind was playing tricks on me. It's just the wind, I tried to convince myself, but deep down something told me I wasn't alone. The footsteps became sharper, now echoing closer, and my heart began to pound. I looked around, trying to identify the source of the noise, but I saw no one. A shiver ran down my spine as I stepped out of the store, determined to investigate. Walking through those empty hallways was like crossing a labyrinth with no exit. The dim light glowed above, casting dancing shadows on the walls. I ventured to the corner where one of the large tech stores was located. Its shelves sat there, dead in the gloom, and television images flickered on the monitors, even though there was no electricity. It must be a short circuit, I thought again, trying to rationalize the inexplicable. But then the footsteps sounded again, much clearer this time. They were firm, heavy steps, and I felt like I was being followed. I decided it was time to go back to my store. But as I turned around, I realized the lights were flickering strangely. A shadow at the end of the hall caught my eye. It was blurry, but it moved quickly and nimbly, as if trying to avoid being illuminated. Instinctively, the urge to run took over, but I stayed paralyzed, watching. That's when I heard a laugh, soft and mocking, that reverberated in the air. It couldn't be real. I covered my ears with my hands, but the laughter continued, echoing around me. It was a sound that digs into the soul, as if a presence had knowledge of my deepest fears. Suddenly, I thought of the stories about the mall, the rumors about lost souls and spirits that never found peace. Finally, I left my curiosity behind. I headed back to the store, locking the door with both bolts. My mind was obsessed with the idea that I might not be alone, that perhaps I wasn't just a mall worker, but a witness to the other side. Perhaps that shadow, that laugh, was a warning I had ignored. Minutes later, I stood still, trying to calm my breathing. The lights flickered once more, and I felt a bang on the door. The noise wasn't from a person, but something heavier, more sinister. I rushed to call my supervisor, but there was no answer. At that moment, I knew I had to get out. Without a second thought, I ran toward the emergency exit. When I finally made it out of the mall, the fresh night air hit me all at once. I looked back and saw the lights flickering in the store. Then, a dark figure appeared in the doorway, watching me as the echo of its laughter resonated in my ears. I promised myself I would never work past closing time again, though I knew, deep down, that what I had seen that night would haunt me forever. I have been working the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift at this mall for 6 months. My route includes supervising the ground floor department store, one of those with massive glass windows facing the central hallway. The store is full of high-fashion mannequins, white fiberglass figures, faceless, with long and elegant limbs. The first time I noticed something strange was a week ago. There was a male mannequin at the entrance of the suit section, with one hand in its pocket and the other extended. I passed by with my flashlight, clocked in at the control station, and kept going. As I turned the corner to head back to the booth, I looked toward the display window again. The mannequin was still in the same spot, but its hand was no longer in its pocket. Now both arms hung rigid at its sides, and its head was tilted slightly to the right, as if it were trying to see who was walking down the hall. I froze. I checked the locks on the glass doors. They were intact. There was no sign of pranksters or other employees. I entered the store, the sound of my boots echoing on the marble floor, and approached the figure. I touched it. It was cold, solid and heavy. There were no mechanisms, no motors, no wires. It was just an inert display piece. I forced the mannequin's posture back to its original shape, but the material was so rigid that it took an enormous effort to move the arms. I locked the store again and went to the monitoring office to check the cameras. For the next 40 minutes, I didn't take my eyes off the screen. In the still image, the mannequin didn't move, it didn't blink, it didn't walk. But the moment I bent down to pick up a pen I had dropped, I heard a blunt thud through the camera's microphone. When I looked up, the mannequin was no longer at the entrance. It was 10 feet closer to the main window, its back to the store, looking directly toward the hallway I usually walk through. I stayed glued to the monitor, my hands trembling. I didn't want to go back into the store. I convinced myself it was a glitch in the camera's perspective, or exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. But at 4 a.m., security protocol forced me to do the final foot patrol through the central hallway, right in front of that store's window. I walked, pressed against the opposite wall, trying not to look toward the glass, but the reflection of my own flashlight betrayed me. As I illuminated the suit section, I saw that the mannequin was no longer on the floor. It had climbed onto one of the wooden display tables, just inches from the glass. It was crouched in a posture that no fiberglass figure should be able to adopt without breaking. Its long, rigid fingers were pressed against the glass, and although it had no eyes, I felt all its attention fixed on my uniform. The silence of the mall became oppressive. I stopped walking and stood motionless in the middle of the hallway. At that moment, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold, a dry crack, like someone breaking dry branches, but with a hollow echo. It came from inside the store. The mannequin began to slowly straighten up, and I could see the fiberglass of its shoulders cracking and splintering with every movement, as if the structure were fighting against its own rigidity to stand up. I didn't wait to see more. I started walking toward the emergency exit, trying not to run so as not to make noise. But the cracking sounds followed me from the other side of the glass. Crick, crack, crick. The sound moved at the same speed as I did. When I reached the last display window before the exit hall, I stopped for a second and aimed my flashlight. The The mannequin was there, pressed against the glass, its face pushed against the transparent surface. It no longer had a smooth surface. Its face was full of deep cracks, as if the effort of moving were destroying it from the inside. I left the building and stayed in the parking lot under the streetlights until the morning shift arrived. I didn't say anything to my supervisor. I simply handed over the keys and the radio. As I walked to my car, I took one last look toward the main glass entrance of the mall. Through the locked door, I could see in the distance, in the gloom of the central hallway, a tall white figure standing right in the middle of the corridor, outside its store, motionless under the skylight. I've been working as a monitor operator at Plaza Norte Mall since it opened. It's a modern building, full of glass and steel, but when the store lights go out at 10 p.m., the place turns into a labyrinth of shadows. My job is simple: monitor the 120 security cameras from a room full of screens. However, camera 42, located in the service hallway behind the cinema area, has always been a problem. That hallway is a dead end that only leads to a sealed machine room. There are no drafts, no entry points for animals, and no public access. Even so, camera 42's motion sensor triggers every night, exactly at 3:15 a.m. The strange thing isn't that it triggers, but what it shows. No one is visible on the screen, but objects in the hallway react as if a crowd were passing through. Last night, I decided to watch the screen with total focus. At the exact time, the sensor flagged motion detected on the grainy image. I saw the advertising flyers taped to the wall shake violently as if someone were running past them. Then, a metal trash can was displaced a few inches with a screech I could hear through the system's microphone. No one was there, just the echo of metal scraping the floor in an empty hallway. I radioed my patrol partner, a skeptical man named Carlos, and asked him to check it out while I watched on the monitor. Carlos entered hallway 42 with his flashlight in hand. On my screen, I saw something that made me drop my coffee as Carlos walked toward the back of the hall. The sensor indicated something was coming from the opposite direction, straight at him. I saw Carlos's jacket flap as if someone had pushed him while passing by, but he stood still, confused, saying over the radio that he had only felt a blast of freezing air. Carlos returned to the security booth pale, rubbing his arm as if he could still feel the cold of that hallway. He didn't want to talk. He just sat beside me and stared at the screen for camera 42. We decided to do something not allowed. We rewound the recording frame by frame, applying maximum zoom at the exact moment he felt the push. We weren't looking for ghosts. We were trying to understand what the hell had touched him. In the video, the hallway looked normal, but at the exact second, the image suffered a distortion. It wasn't a system glitch. It was as if a patch of invisible static took shape in front of Carlos. For a brief moment, the silhouette of something extremely tall and thin appeared, moving with a speed the camera could barely process. On the monitor, I saw that shadow extend a long, deformed arm that passed through my partner's body. Carlos, beside me, let out a groan of pain and pulled up his sleeve. He had 5 purple marks bruised into the skin of his shoulder, as if iron fingers had squeezed him with force. Terrified, we kept watching the screen. The static patch didn't go away. It stayed there, standing in the middle of the hallway, looking toward the camera. It had no face, but the motion sensor on the screen started going crazy, flashing red alerts across the entire quadrant. Suddenly, the figure began walking toward the lens. It didn't run, but with every step it took, the lights in the service hallway on the monitor exploded one by one, plunging the image into total darkness. We heard a blunt thud coming from outside our office. The security booth door vibrated as if someone had kicked it from the hallway. I looked at the monitors for the other cameras, the ones facing our door, and saw no one. But on camera 42, the sensor kept indicating that something was there, right in front of us, separated only by a concrete wall. The cold in the booth became so intense that our breath began to form vapor. We didn't investigate further. Carlos and I left the booth and locked ourselves in the food court, where the lights are brightest, until dawn. The next day, we reported that camera 42 had burned out due to a short circuit. The technicians went to check it and said it was strange. The lens was melted from the inside, as if it had been exposed to an impossible temperature, but the wires were intact. I still work at the mall, but I no longer operate the monitors. I requested a transfer to exterior maintenance. Sometimes, when the mall closes and silence floods everything, I hear through the ventilation ducts that same sound of metal scraping the floor that I heard on the camera. I don't stop to investigate. Now I know there are places in this building where cameras shouldn't look, and there are things that, even if you don't see them, make sure you know they see you. It's curious how such a familiar place can become so hostile when we're left alone with it. The cameras record everything, but sometimes they catch things we'd rather have never seen. If you've ever felt watched while walking through an empty mall, maybe it wasn't just your imagination. If you have a similar experience, leave it in the comments. I'm very interested in hearing your story. Don't forget to subscribe for more night shifts and hit the bell so you don't miss our next special. Be careful the next time you stay past closing. Something might be waiting in the next aisle.